Okay. Amaku aloha mahalo. E mai kai. Ike ahale. Ame ke po imanu. Blessings to this place and all these people gathered here. My name is Serge Kahili King, and welcome to our Sunday Talk story. We also like to start with a blessing, and we have one of our staff who is a master, I guess you could use master for a female, is that allowed, right? Of string figures, and she's, which includes chanting and all kinds of stuff. So she knows the culture. That's Hawaiian string figures, I mean. And so she knows the culture very well, and please.
The chant that I can share with you today was taught to us by Graeme Kapono Urlich, and is a chant that has such beautiful memories of going up to Halimakamaku in the early morning hours and singing with a group of students. And it speaks to Pele. It speaks of new beginnings in a sense of the new sun that comes up and rises, and Pele's sister Hiaka would wake, but only by Pele's, or Pele would wake only by Hiaka's help, gently waking her up. And so we would sing it to gently wake up our new day, our new beginnings, the new sun that came to the sky. Aloha e kalai kawapene Kalapuno no ikamako kalehua Uahiolani pele uamari e Hei nawe ike nakapohi e aloha e alai e aloha your hearts and into the beauty of your smile. Aloha, mahalo.
Mahalo, Lois. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome. Come on in. Hi. Now, what we usually do, we have a topic, but we like to begin with a Hawaiian legend. And so that's what we're going to do today. And this is the legend. Well, let me get right into it. And goes like this. Ikawakahiko, mamua loa okapena kuke. Once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, there was a young man named Paka'a who lived on the island of Kauai. He lived there with his mother La'a. They were poor people, had no friends, but they loved each other greatly. Now, young Paka'a was full of curiosity about life, about everything. And in another story, actually, about him, he's supposed to have invented the sail for the sailing canoes. But that's another story. Okay, we're not going to talk about that one. But one day, Paka'a came to his mother, because, you know, they were just living alone, he and his mother. And he said, "Mother, I want to know about my father." And she said, sighed. That wasn't the first time he had asked. Ever since he could speak, he kept asking. But she said, "No." She said, you're too young." And he says, "Nope." He says, "I must know." He said, "Grandfather got really angry at me, and he called me the son of a servant. But the way he said it, it was so angry, it sounded like he was saying the son of a slave. Now, was my father a servant, or was he a slave?" Oh, his mother got really, really, sad, almost cried. And then she said, "All right, no, your father was not a slave. He was a servant." Now she's going to talk a little bit more about that, but I got to explain something. A bit about ancient Hawaiian culture. In the ancient times, there was a slave caste. Now, they were actually a caste. When there's a caste in a society, it means these are people who are stuck in that role. They can't get out. And that's what these people were. They were called the kawa. And From what we know, from things that we've read from Captain Cook and from other people who've made inquiries, what the Hawaiians themselves said, why it seems that these were sort of like an Aboriginal people before the Polynesians got here. And that, but also, they could be the captured chiefs or the children of captured chiefs. So they were kept on separate reservations. They weren't allowed to mingle, and actually no one could visit those reservations from outside. There was a death penalty if anybody else tried to go there. They were used, they were kind of kept in reserve. They had to do the lowest kind of labor in the society, but also they were used for human sacrifices whenever it was felt that those were needed at this time. And so they had a very, very rough life, but they were despised by everybody. And the worst insult that anybody could give a person would be to call them a kawa. Then we have one of these peculiarities of Hawaiian culture and language. Because at the same time that this was so, if there was a close servant and advisor and helper of a high chief, he could be called the kawa of the chief, without any bad connotations at all. Okay? As a matter of fact, in this kind of a meaning, the missionaries, when they were translating the Bible into Hawaiian, and they wanted to translate servant of God, they used kawa as the word. Okay? So the meaning of the word depended entirely on context and intonation, and lots of Hawaiian words like that. But I want to give you a little background on what the kawa was and why the boy was so upset and how he got confused if his grandfather said this, what the meaning was. So the mother said, no, your father is actually had a different name, a different title. He was called Ke Kuamo'o Ke Ali'i, the backbone of the chief. He is, she said, he's the person who is the close servant and advisor and companion of Keawe Nui, Keawe the Great. So this was in those times. And she said, so that's his status. But he's far away on Hawaii Island. And the boy said, well, if I'm the son of a chief and you're the wife of a chief, why are we so poor and why doesn't anybody like us? And she said, well, because your grandparents are very angry with me. Because your father came to this island and he stayed a while and we fell in love and we got married. And then Keawe called him back to Hawaii. And the parents are very mad that I married a stranger who had to leave rather than a Kauai chief who had a lot of power and a lot of land. So, and then the neighbors all laugh at us because they say I made a very bad marriage, a very bad choice, as if it didn't come from the heart. So she told him all of this, and so he understood, and he said, well, when I grow up, I'm going to find my father, and I'm going to see if he'll accept me as his son. So things happened a lot faster than expected because Paka'a was still a young boy. But it turned out that the high chief of Kauai had decided to make a journey around Kauai and to the other islands and all the way over to Big Island. And Paka'a was a nice kid, and he had made friends with some of the lesser servants of the high chief, and when things were getting ready to go and he heard about it, he asked them if he could go along, and they said, sure, we got plenty of stuff for you to do. So then he came and asked his mother, and his mother saw that, okay, this was a chance, this was an opportunity, it was unlikely anything good like this was going to happen again. So she finally gave permission, very reluctantly. The servants even asked if they could take him. But she told him, she said, when you get there, if you get there, she said, you want to, and you find the chief in his household, then he's the one who's going to be wearing a well-toothed pendant. And I'll explain that. And sitting beside him is going to be a man holding a kahili, and I'll explain that too in a moment. But the man holding the kahili is your father. And she says, if you can get past the guards, and this won't be easy, but if you get past the guard, you run and you sit in your father's lap and you tell him your name. And he'll recognize you as his son because he's the one who gave you that name. So, okay, all that was set up. So now let me go offside a little bit and explain what I was talking about. One of the very old and traditional types of symbols was a lei that was only worn by the high chief. It was made from the tooth of a sperm whale. It was called niho palawa, and that's what that means, tooth of a sperm whale. And the tooth was strung on strands of human hair. Now, ivory was such a valuable commodity that even when the high chief would put certain districts and areas under the charge of another chief, why he reserved for himself the right to any and all ivory collected anywhere. Okay? And because it was very precious and you didn't get it very often. So this pendant, the regular tooth of a sperm whale, kind of looks like a tooth, and a hole would be drilled in it and it would be worn with the multiple hair. That was one way. The other way was for a fine carver to take that tooth and carve it into what some people think is a hook, but is actually a symbolic human tongue. And when that was hung on the human hair, the tongue represented the power of words, because the power, out of the mouth of the high chief comes life, and out of his mouth comes death, was the old proverb. And hair was always considered in Hawaiian symbology as representing thought. And so the power of words is hangs on the power of thought. And that was the idea. Now the high chief could wear this, and so could any member of his immediate family, but ordinary chiefs didn't wear this. Some of them actually made them out of wood, but these were looked down on. It's like, you know, if somebody who's real uppity is wearing black pearls and they see that you're wearing keshi pearls from China, say, that's nothing. So that's how they looked on when a piece of wood was carved like a whale tooth. That's just not there. Okay. So Keawe Nui, of course, had the ivory one. Now the kahili bearer, kahili is a pole. Originally, it was a fly whisk. It was made from a rod, and feathers were tied to it in a kind of a neat circular pattern. Kind of, you know, the kahili ginger. That's why it's called the kahili ginger. The pattern looked just like that. Okay? And so it was made of all these feathers. And originally it was used as a fly whisk, and even later sometimes you'd see that. But then it became a symbol of power. And so the more power, the bigger the kahili. And so this man would be sitting next to the king holding a pole. And the huts weren't all that big. Later, during the monarchy, they got giant, get 20-foot kahilis. But then it maybe it would have been 6-8 feet. But it would be a symbol of Keawe Nui's power. Okay? Not related to my family name. My Hawaiian family name is Kahili, but it's a different meaning. Okay. So, the voyage starts. And Paka'a gets involved with the voyage. And of course, he has to work very hard, but he wanted to work very hard because he wanted to make a good impression. And so, and on the road they travel, and he was all wondrous at all the things he saw, because they lived on the southern part of Kauai, and never once went very many places. Most people didn't travel a lot. So here they are in this big voyage, and they come around and they stopped. The chief wanted to see the Great Canyon, what people call the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, this giant canyon that almost splits Kauai in half. And then they came around and saw the most beautiful cliffs at the Napali coast, and then the almost perfect circular bay of Hanalei. And then off they took to Oahu. And the main thing looking from the shores of Oahu that they saw were the fires on Diamond Head. Now Diamond Head is really, the Hawaiian name is Laiahe, Ahi. And this is kind of strange. Some of the translators get all mixed up and don't know the culture, and they translate in silly ways. They translate this as brow of the tuna, because one of the meanings of Lai is forehead, and Ahi, one of the meanings of Ahi is tuna. Well, what make, and you see you see Diamond Head sticking up like that. Well, tunas don't have brows. So that's what throws that one all off. These people have never seen a tuna. Okay. Ahi also means fire. And the fire pits have been found on the rim of Diamond Head, and that was used to help people coming in for navigation, because there were a lot of reefs and things out in the waters. And so Laiahi meant, and Lai also means not just a human forehead, but a cape, a piece of land that really sticks out into the water. Okay, so Laiahi means the cape of fire, or the fiery cape. So they passed that, and that was very impressive. They passed along the waterfalls of Molokai, and they passed along in Maui. They saw the Haleakala, this incredible giant cone, which is very impressive because it's so close to the water. On Big Island we have bigger ones, but they're not as impressive because they're back in the middle of the island. Okay, so Haleakala was very impressive, but they did come to the Big Island. And on the Big Island, of course, one of the most impressive things of all was the lava flowing down and streaming into the ocean. And when they came around the south, that's what they saw. And then up they came to Hilo, because it's far more dangerous to come around the northern way. So they came around, landed at Hilo, and on the way, Paka'a had learned all kinds of skills. I mean, he'd learned the skills at sea, he learned how to sail, he learned how to tie knots, he learned how to fish, he learned all the thing doing with the sea, and on the land he learned actually a lot of the skills that were followed by chiefs. He learned about wrestling and running and spear throwing and all the kinds of things like that too. So he was still a young boy, but a very knowledgeable young boy for his time, because that opportunity in a short period of time didn't come to a lot of people. Anyway, they land. Now, after they landed, of course, Paka'a got to see Keawe, and he got to see his father, but only in processions at a distance. And when they went to the king's household, at that time in Hawaii, and most of ancient Hawaii, the people didn't live in villages. People lived in household compounds. And so there'd be a cluster of huts that would belong to a family. And of course the cluster of huts would usually be surrounded by a wall for the king or the high chief, and they would have guards there, but still it was a very similar cluster of huts, except they'd just be bigger. And one of them was where they spent most of the time during the day when they were inside. So Paka'a knew where that would be in the compound, but getting into the compound, he didn't know how he was going to do that because of the guards. They were, fierce. So he prayed and he prayed and he prayed and waited, and finally one day something happened. Near the entrance to the compound, for some reason, between some of the groups of people there, a fight started. And of course the guards didn't want this to bother the high chief, so they all rushed off from away from the entrance, and Paka'a saw that and he was ready, and he slipped right in. And he slips right into the big room where Keawe Nui is sitting, and his father's name, he'd found it was Kuanu'uanu. And so he recognized him immediately from what his mother had told him. And so he didn't hesitate. As soon as he got in the entrance, when they both looked at him, he just ran over and jumped in his father's lap. And his father said, what are you doing sitting in my lap like this, you impertinent child? And he looked up at him, he says, my name is Paka'a, and my mother La'a sent me to find you. Well, he was stunned, and tears started coming to his eyes, because he loved the wife, and he loved the child that they had between them, although he was only a baby when he left, but because he had to come and stay with the high chief. That was his role. And so the high chief looked over Kahili Nui and he says, "Who is this child?" And the man said, "This is my son." Ah, okay, so now the chief looked at him with better eyes and he says, "Well, train him well, so that if you ever have to leave me, this child can become Kekua, the backbone, Kekua mo'o, okeali'i, the backbone of the chief, like you are. Pipiholo ke'ao," and so goes the story. Okay. Now we're going to take that story as a kind of a lead-in to the topic that we'll be talking about today. The topic for today is how to feel good about yourself. If you don't feel good about yourself for any reason, and this happens to a lot of people because of a lot of things that have happened as they grew up, still it's possible to change that. If you feel good about yourself in certain ways, at certain times, or with certain people, it's possible to feel good about yourself all the time. And if you already feel good about yourself, it's possible to feel even better. So I'm going to give you some ideas and techniques that'll help you do that. That's what this is all about. And the kinds of things I'm teaching come out of the tradition and the concepts that I learned from my Hawaiian family, and that I've spent my time putting into a modern context. The main thing that keeps us from feeling good about ourselves, the main thing I'd say, is our self-image. Now you may have heard the term before, but what a self-image is all the ideas you have about yourself and about how other people think about you. It doesn't really have to be an image, but that's the term that it's given. It's all the ideas that you have about yourself. And where I say the main problem is that if you have one of these self-images that isn't good in relation both to yourself and your own mind and in your relationship to others, then it's really hard to feel good about yourself. See, as a fertilized egg, you don't have any preconceptions about yourself. You're just these two things that got together and now you're one. Wow, you're in that state. But then as the moment you begin turning into an embryo to become a human being, you start to be influenced by your environment. For the rest of your life. Influenced. That's very important. Now, we're also influenced by our DNA. People call this genetics, but DNA is really just the memories of our ancestors. And when you stop to think about it, you probably had millions, maybe even billions of ancestors. Okay? And if all of them are trying to influence you, they almost neutralize each other. And you've picked out of that pool of possibilities, for whatever reason, you've picked out the characteristics that are yours. But the ancestors don't determine how you think about yourself. That comes from environment. Okay? Now I said that your environment influences you. That does not mean it controls you. Right? It influences you. You still have the possibility of changing your mind or getting new ideas about what you think of what other people have told you and how you feel and how you think right now. Okay? That's why I call it only influence. The first way we're influenced is by our physical environment. This does make a difference. You know, if you live in a desert, or if you live in a secluded mountain valley, or the different kinds of places that you live are going to influence you. That's your physical environment. Okay? You're also born, because this isn't coming from the thoughts of other people, wherever you're born, and this is almost like an ancestor influence, you have, at least in this particular lifetime, a certain kind of body and a certain kind of characteristics, physical characteristics. They're going to influence you, how you think and how you feel and what you do. Now, many people are able to change the physical influence by moving someplace else. You're going to be so changed by moving to Hawaii from New York. Okay? Yeah. So people can change their physical influence in that way. The second thing is our cultural environment. This influences us. Now, this includes language and traditions and customs. Many people change this influence by learning new languages and new customs and new cultural things without necessarily giving up their original ones. But when you learn a different language, it's amazing the influence that language has. When you learn a different language, are able to speak in a different language, you'll discover it's a whole different mindset. It's almost like the language not forces, but highly influences you to think in certain ways about certain things. And if you wonder how that can possibly be, well, let me give you Hawaiian as an example. Because Hawaiian language has no past tense. And Hawaiian language has no future tense. When the Hawaiians talk about something that happened in the past, they talk about something that's over and done with. They have a marker. Same with the future. When they're talking about the future, they're talking about something that hasn't happened yet. And in Hawaiian, that's how you have to think of it. When you see translations, translations are not giving you the whole story. One little thing I want to add on that. I remember I learned French because I was in West Africa for a very long time. And I read, well, first of all, I read one of my favorite books was The Three Musketeers. And I read it in English. And I really enjoyed it. And then I read it in French. And I laughed and cried out loud. It wasn't the same experience. Okay? It really, really wasn't. So language has a big influence. I'm not saying you ought to do this, but the more languages you know, or even know about, the more options you have for different ways to think. So it's something to consider. Now, the third influence, the main one, the influence of our social environment. This is a biggie because it includes family, friends, acquaintances, associates, authorities, teachers, healers, communications, the media. If you think you're not influenced by the media, well, you individually may not be. But here in the United States, if any of you are from somewhere else, you know, we have the media performs an important service, not for the people, but for the drug companies, because every fall, they teach you very carefully and specifically how to get the flu. Okay? And that's very important for the economy. But it does it influences a lot of people, see? So all of these things, not just the individual people, but the way people communicate and what the communications themselves are and all of the expectations, they're a big influence. Many people change this influence by choosing to interact with different groups and different people. Almost like create new families, you know, join different organizations where they're surrounded by different ideas. Okay? So that's one way that people change that. Okay? But the most important influence of all is the internal environment. It's what's going on inside you, meaning your memories, your expectations, your reflections and speculations, your rules about people and things and yourself and life in general. This is the most important influence because this one's going on all the time. Okay? And the problem here is too many people never bother to change it or never even think about changing it. But it can be changed. And I'm going to give you some ways. One big reason for not feeling good about ourselves is guilt. And I have to throw in a language thing here because there's no word for guilt in the common Western sense in Hawaiian. There's a word word for making a mistake that is usually translated as guilt. And it would be correct to use it in a court of law. The word is hala. But the feeling of wrongness because you did something, it's not in the language. You could not express that. Okay? So that's just one thing about language. So on this feeling of guilt gives an awful lot of unnecessary unhappiness. Now, it's always good to forgive others for not acting up to your standards, but if you want to change this one, you're going to have to learn how to forgive yourself for not acting according to your own standards. That's part of the big problem here. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying that what you did or didn't do was good or okay. It doesn't mean that at all. It means to admit you made a mistake according to the standards of yours or someone else's. And forgiveness means to stop feeling bad about it. Because that's the whole point. Okay? The way to stop feeling bad about it is to do something to make up for it if you can, and accept that as being what you can do, and whether you can, but mainly stop dwelling on it. See? It isn't the event itself that makes you feel bad, it's rehashing it in your mind all the time. Okay? Forgive and go on. In the old Hawaiian system of Ho'oponopono, there were a number of variations for that, but it meant to make things right. And when it was done as a family kind of gathering or among friends, or today even in corporations and management and labor, if you're doing the formal style, when you come to the end, the person who's leading this says, "E malu." And that means peace. Once everybody's been forgiven, once everything is resolved, what that means is, don't think of this ever again. Pow, done, finished. Don't bring it up. And that's why it worked. Okay? So, that's one thing. Another reason for feeling bad is the frequent, and for some people almost constant, thinking about their faults and lacks. A lot of people are always doing that. Okay? Thinking about what's wrong with them, what they lack, what they don't have, or what they can't do, or all these kinds of things. This gets worse when this kind of thinking includes comparing themselves to other people, who they think is better in some way. Okay? Look, the problem is caused by thinking that we should be different than we are. Once we introduce this kind of should into our thinking, we're in a trap. Now, I can go into a long psychological thing to try and explain the trap, but I'm going to explain it in a much more simple way. Here's the trap. We should be better, but we aren't. But we should be, 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 but we aren't. And what this does is drain all the energy for changing. You get so locked up into what you should be and what you aren't, fighting together in your mind, you never stop to change. Got to drop the shoulds. It's a little bit of a tricky thing sometimes, but practice not ever using the word. Okay? Some people will say, well, could, okay, that's a lot better. Okay? But basically, it creates an impossible trap to get out of if you keep doing it. Well, I should have done that. It's over. It's done. You didn't. What you going to do now? Okay? That's what's important. Okay? And that's going to help to whatever degree you can do that. Now, this may be news to you. You may not have thought about it, although you probably experienced it. It's really, really hard to feel bad about yourself if you're fully involved in the present moment. The more really involved you are in doing something, you don't think bad about yourself. It's really hard to do. You have to slip back to do that. Okay? So the more time you spend involved in some enjoyable or creative or useful way in the present moment, the less you feel bad about yourself. Now this is really good, to feel what it feels like not to feel bad about yourself. By itself, it isn't going to change, because you all might go back out of habit to the old way of thinking when you're not doing something. But in the present moment, you can't do that. Now, this is going to take practice, but here's what you can do. Because it's so easy to slip back into that negative. The moment you find yourself back in the negative attitude about yourself, don't feel bad or guilty because you did it, okay? But the moment you find yourself there, you purposely shift your mind, like a negative memory, purposely shift your mind to a positive memory. A vacation, something nice you did with somebody, some present you received, something. It's possible for you to do that. You don't have to keep dwelling on the same thought that you're dwelling on. You might do it out of habit, but you don't have to keep doing it. So when you notice the negative state, in fact, if you could do this beforehand, pick a whole list of good things, that you kind of have in your pocket that you can pull out when you need them. But slip onto one of those, and it's going to get you out of that bad feeling. The same thing happens in the future. Sometimes we expect failure, we expect rejection, or expect some bad thing to happen because we're not good enough. There's a stock phrase that we've had a lot of success in helping people learn this. The stock phrase that a lot of people use is, what if something bad happens? Okay, well, be fair. You got to think, what if something good happens? Keep it even. And you'll be surprised how often the fear of what if something bad happens diminishes and maybe even disappears. But what if something good happens? What are you going to do then? Okay? What's your plan? Okay? That's going to take you out of that other negative way of thinking about the future in relation to yourself. Now, one of the worst of all human experiences is to grow up being criticized. It's painful, and it does have a very powerful influence, but it's possible to get out of that too. Very easy to let others become create the model for how you think about yourself. Right? Because especially with parents, we give so much authority to the parents, and then to the teachers, and then to the people in charge of whatever. It's easy to grow up that way. Now, the way out of this is both simple and hard. Got to tell you this. You want to climb a mountain? That's a wonderful thing to do, but it's not always easy. Well, the way out of this is simple and hard. You have to practice appreciating yourself. And you have to practice a lot. Purposely, willfully practicing this. Now, I don't mean pretending that you're better than you are. I mean appreciating the good that you are, that you do, and about you, things about you. Every morning, here's one thing that'll help. Every morning after waking up, and every night before going to sleep, and any time during the day you feel like it, okay? Thank your body for what it's done. Thank your mind for anything good that's come into it. And thank your spirit for producing whatever goodness and beauty there might be around you. Okay? Or at least bringing your attention to it. If you do this in the morning, you get used to, this is kind of a backdoor way of appreciating yourself. You start appreciating your body and your mind and your spirit, and you start getting used to that. And that'll start helping you change this pattern, if there is one, of not feeling good. Next thing, become aware of how much you criticize, especially how much you criticize yourself. Of course, when you criticize anything else, that affects you too, but the worst one is when you criticize yourself. Be aware of that. First thing, just be aware. You might be surprised of so many little ways in which we do that. Now, and then you practice noticing anything good that happens or is around you during the day when you think of it, okay? But you purposely notice it. Hey, that's good. That's nice. Thank you. A lot of people think it's funny that, you know, you're with someone else and it's supposed to be someone you love or like a lot. And why should I say thank you? This kind of strange thinking. Thank you, and similar terms, are the grease that makes relationships ride smoothly. Okay? It's appreciated. The acknowledgement of something you've done, whether it's the dishes or cleaning the house or bringing home the bacon, the acknowledgement of that helps you feel good and helps the other person feel good. Right? That's why you do it. And it helps people emotionally feel better about each other when you make that kind of an acknowledgement. And so that's helping your feeling good about yourself too. And here's one. Practice imagining yourself being complimented or even applauded for anything. You get up, you look in the mirror and you imagine this big crowd applauding you. You got up today, yay for you. Now I'll give you a warning. Okay? You start doing this kind of a thing, what's going to happen is going to shake you up to the hairs of your head. Okay? But you'll get used to it. But especially if you're not used to it, this can really produce some strange feelings in your body. Mostly relaxation or tension we didn't know was there. But it feels odd when we're not used to it. But go ahead. Imagine being appreciated. Imagine compliments. Imagine applause. It feels good. Okay? No one's going to laugh at you. Okay? And it's part of the process of changing how you think about yourself. All right? Now here's an easier one. Oh, I left out one that's a little one here, but it's not really a little one. Don't compare yourself to anybody. Not in a good way, not in a bad way. You're unique. You don't need to compare. Right? You don't need to be better. You don't need to be worse. You're you. So the more you can give that up, that's going to be really, really helpful. Now here's an easy one though. Develop skills. It doesn't matter what they are. But this steady process of becoming skillful at something. We don't have to, learn one skill and that's it for the rest of our life. That's silly. There's so much to learn. There's so much to do. There's so many things in life that are exciting. And we don't have to become perfect. I think I got down here too. Don't be God. Don't try to be God. Only God's perfect. Okay? If you learn a skill, you are as skillful as the amount you learned. Somebody said one time, and I've taught this too, I use this in my teaching, but I remember it came from a Japanese man who went to Japan and he learned a little bit of martial arts and came back and people wanted him to teach, and he wrote to the master and said, how can I teach? I know so little. And he says, if you learn one day of knowledge, you can teach one day of knowledge. The master said, go ahead, teach what you know. Well, the skill is whatever level of skill you have. And if you can appreciate that, just learning the skill itself, if you acknowledge it as a good thing, is going to help you feel better about yourself. That's a really good and an easy way. Finally, This is another easy way that really helps you feel good about yourself. Help other people. Help other people in some way that helps them feel good. There's something that feels so good about helping someone else feel good. Now, you can't make them feel good. There are some people who have decided not to feel good no matter what you do. Okay? But there are going to be enough of them out there who are going to appreciate it, who are going to feel good and get benefit from something you do. So the more people you help, you can even help people. I know some people do this. I've done it too. You can help people without even ever having to know whether they got happy or not. When we used to have a lot of, used to have pay telephones, some friends and I used to go around and put money in them. Well, people come along and they're always checking to see, wow, the look on somebody's face when they actually got a quarter or something like that. That's a good feeling. Used to leave dimes and nickels on newspaper racks. Okay? Give somebody something to find. That's a lot of fun. And you may or may not ever see them picking it up, but somebody's going to and get benefit from it. So there's all kinds of big and little ways in which you can help people. And in doing it, feel good about yourself. There's a key here, though, that's also important. Right? Treat gratitude as a gift. Okay? If you're doing the good thing to get gratitude, so that someone else will think you're so wonderful, or say thank you, or do something good for you, you're losing the benefit. If you do get a thank you, feel good. That's a gift. But don't make it a payment. Okay? Big, big difference there. Okay? So, Pau Ka'olelo, the story is done. Do we have any questions or comments? Well, while you're thinking about that, this is a free meeting. And I want you all to feel very comfortable with that. At the same time, we are a nonprofit organization. We have some projects that you might be interested in. One of the projects, we give out little booklets on how to practice Aloha. Actually, how to practice the art of blessing. It's a pink booklet back there. If you haven't gotten one, feel free to pick one up before you go. And we not only give those out here, we have them translated in 25 languages online for free download, and we mail them out free to individuals all around the world. That's, with postage gone up, that's one project that you could help us with, because we don't charge what the postage is. Doesn't matter where in the world, we'll send it to them. There's another booklet that goes not necessarily with it, but it's a fabulous healing technique, a self-healing technique called the Dynamind technique, and we do that one. We send that one out free as well, and we have them in PDF copies for by email as well. So that's one of them. We have a website that we maintain with a huge amount of information, including over 300 articles on this knowledge. Today's talk will probably become an article at some point down the road. But we have tons and tons of articles, not only by me, but by lots of other good people, about living, about life, and how to do things, and how to feel good, and how to heal yourself. There's a lot of that too. We do a lot of free counseling. I mean, I could just keep running on all the things that we do that are a benefit, but I'm going to let you decide if you want to do anything. So I'm going to pass out the calabash. Pass out the calabash. Now, and we finish here. Yes. Okay. When we finish here, we're also going to have a healing blessing. You can use it for yourself, or you can use it for other people you care about. And so to do that, we use these stones. These baskets are getting heavier. Stones and shells and things that people from all over the world have given us, and we use that for the blessing. So pick one out. You don't have to sit and meditate, just trust the stone or whatever it is to jump into your hand and pass it on, and we'll use that at the end. Now, I'm giving you some time to think. Any questions or comments? Yes.
I wonder if you comment a little more on the use of the difference between in language, between the past that was done. I think you commented on it before. I thought it before, but it's gone now. Just how,
Okay.
Yeah, the past which is done because they're
Oh, you mean like in the Hawaiian?
in Hawaiian, yes.
Okay, the question has to do with going a little more in this idea of the past being finished as a concept and as a way of thinking in a language. Okay? Well, like I said, the Hawaiian language only has a past and future markers. And it tells you whether something has been done or not. You have to understand also, and when you start getting into the culture and finding out what the thinking was like in the old days, in our Western way and mostly modern way of looking at the future, we look ahead to the future. And so we think of it as a place. It's a tendency. And we have to get ready for it because it's out there. We can see where we're going to be. Okay? And that is a very Indo-European language way of looking at the future. Okay? The past is a place that we've come from, and the path is still going back to it. And so we feel so strongly influenced because of the nature of our language, influenced by the past and influenced by the future. So much so that when I first went to the university and I read the book and the professor said, "Mr. King, define for me the present moment." And out of the book I quoted, "The present moment is the interface between the past and the future." He said, "Right, Mr. King." Inside, of course, I said, "Wrong, you nut." Okay? Yeah. All of this is nothing? Come on. So, that was a criticism. I don't do that anymore. So when we're looking at the Hawaiian way now, here's how totally different it is. And again, influenced by the language. This is the past, because we can see it. That's the future because we can't see it. And this is why among the chiefs, a commoner especially, could be killed if he walked behind the back of a chief, because he was interfering with the future of the chief. That was a death penalty. Okay? Things were harsh sometimes. But it came about because of this. So the Hawaiians, as a people in the old days, they did not celebrate anniversaries for anything. This obsession that the Indo-European people have with celebrating anniversaries of good and bad. Okay? Hawaiians never celebrated anniversaries. They only celebrated one birthday, and that was the first birthday of the eldest child, because the eldest child was very important and had to continue the family traditions and knowledge and things like that. But that's the only birthday, no other birthdays. So I'm telling you, anyone who tells you any date before the arrival of Captain Cook is totally guessing. There's no way to date any events or when anybody was born or anything that happened because of that. Some people try to apply the Western idea to the genealogy, because there's a Western practice that's grown up counting 25 generations. And so they count back in the chance how many generations, and they say, okay, that's when that had to happen. But that's not the purpose of Hawaiian genealogical chants. Right? Genealogical chants are naming the most important ancestors who still exist in the present moment. That's what that's all about. It's not a time factor. They kept no calendars. Okay? You're never ever going to have any problem like the Mayans. Okay? Okay? And so they never made any prophecies that did not have a basis in the present moment. Okay? That just came out of left field someplace. They just didn't do that. And those are some of the things, and I incorporate some of these ways of thinking to help people get rid of the load that they're carrying about the past and the fears that they have about the future. You don't have to have those. You can do what is appropriate in the present moment to prepare, because, you know, probably there's going to be a future of some kind or another. But you don't know for sure. Just like a beautiful quote in a movie I recently saw, Marigold Hotel, the best exotic Marigold Hotel. Okay, she said, "All we know about the future is that it will be different." Okay, so when you can live like that, here is life. Doesn't matter what your language is. This is the only place where you can do something. This is the only place where you can change something. This is the only place where you can enjoy something. Now you can dwell on a memory, but that's a memory. It exists right now. The memory is not the past. Okay? It exists now too. And there's a lot more fun and a lot more life and a lot more health in living where you live. Okay? Yeah, good. Thank you.